This week on the show, it's all about Lumina. We're going to be giving you a visual walkthrough of the new BSD exclusive desktop environment, as well as chatting with the main developer. There's also going to be answers to your emails and questions, and of course, latest news. All on BSD Now, the place to be, SD. BSD Now, episode 54, recorded September 10th, 2014. Hey, I'm your host, Chris Moore.
And I'm Alan Jude.
Well, glad to have you guys with us on this, our 1 year plus one show. So moving on to our second year. This is awesome. I hope you guys enjoyed the show last week and all the little Easter eggs we did with glasses and whatnot.
Silly hats.
But yes, I don't know. Will we have to do that again at the second year anniversary?
I guess we'd have to come up with
works?
something better. I don't know.
I don't know. Okay, maybe it'll get bigger and better, but we'll see. So, cool. Okay, well, let's get right into the headlines for this week, though. We got some good stuff for you. So first up, we got a Port Scout has been ported over to OpenBSD.
Yes.
Wow, Port Scout was ported. That's, anyway.
Kind of a mouthful. Yeah, so Port Scout is a popular utility for the FreeBSD ports infrastructure. What it does is it scans through all the different ports and looks at the dist files, the file you actually download for the port, to compile the package or to compile the application to install it.
Wow.
It looks at the FTP mirrors or the websites or whatever and tries to figure out if there's actually a newer version than the one that the port's using. So the idea here with Port Scout is to send the maintainer of a port a message reminding them, hey, there's a newer version of whatever application this port's for that's been released. You should go update your port.
Yeah, I've been pinged by this
exactly.
a couple times. It was annoying at first, and I was like, oh, this is helpful.
It's like now I don't have to try to find remember to check every so often to see if there's a newer version of this. I get notified when there is. And it also sends a reminder if you're taking too long. It's just exactly very useful. So I can see why the OpenBSD guys would want this. And so they have added that.
So I guess we have some links in the show notes here where you can view the status of it online to see how it works. I guess it's portscout.jasper.la and who maintains what. There's also a list of that in there as well. And it says the author is currently working to get all the features working on OpenBSD, added a few new features as well. And then he decided to fork it and rename it a few days later. So what was the fork for? He renamed it, what, Port Roach?
Apparently. That's random.
Okay. Well, whatever. That's fine. Hey, as long as it's doing the same thing, though, that's a good deal to have available in any operating system. Okay, so next up, this was interesting. I saw this earlier this week, but about sysadmins and systemd refugees flocking to BSD, and it was a Reddit article, Reddit thread. And, as all the drama in Linux land has been happening about the rapid changes to their init system, a la systemd, a lot of people have been looking at BSD alternatives. So we also have an accompanying article, which kind of goes with it, called You've Got Windows in My Linux. Oh, no. Yes. And the accompanying comments to go with it give a nice glimpse into the minds of some of these switchers. Any thoughts you had on these guys,
It's interesting. The first comment on Reddit currently is, what? FreeBSD is not for laptops? And looks at FreeBSD laptop. Tends to work pretty good. PCBSD makes it even easier, but it's just FreeBSD.
A whole lot of the rough edges. So, but it was an interesting thread, and I think it's with all the systemd churn that's happening in Linux, those are comments we've had at trade shows and stuff as well. Well, especially from
especially because Red Hat's and CentOS 7 have jumped to it kind of early. They're usually known more for being kind of conservative distros where you wouldn't expect them to jump on that before it's really ready. I think that's causing some extra head scratching and some consternation. Sure. And if that's better for us, then yay.
Yeah. So of course we will mention the BSD communities are usually very welcoming of switchers. It's pretty nice on this side. So come on over, join the BSD side. We have cookies. Cool. Okay. Next up, Ted Ewingst, our friend who was on the show a while back earlier in the year, also wrote an article about OpenBSD's versioning schemes for those who are not familiar how they do things a little different from some of the other BSDs. And he explains some of the various versioning systems within OpenBSD, from the base to the libraries and other included software. And the biggest thing I remember when I learned about it was, in contrast to FreeBSD's release cycle, OpenBSD isn't as concerned with breaking backwards compat. Right. So they'll do it if they need to make some sort of progress. I remember when Theo gave his talk about time and needing to change that. They just did it. And also how they run their branches a little differently. They just have a head and then a release. And FreeBSD, you got the steps in between.
Quite a few steps, yeah. And there's definitely advantages to the way they do it. By not having to worry about backwards compatibility, it means that they can plow forward faster and accomplish things, big changes more quickly. And just, I guess the thing Theo pointed out when we were talking about, how in FreeBSD there's all these steps between when the code first arrives in the tree and when an end user might actually start using it. Because, it would go from current to stable and then eventually come out in a release. For a minor feature, that could be up to 6 months away, and for a major feature, that could be up to 2 years. And by that time, the developer that was working on it has probably moved on to do some other project or something else.
I don't remember what I wrote there.
Right. So when more edge cases that can only be found when you start having more and more people using it crop up, they've already moved on, and that can cause issues.
So, I'll throw my 2 cents in here if you don't mind, a little opinion segment in the show. But we talked to Theo about this, I think, was it last year at Malta? And I had to talk with him about the way they do their versioning. And frankly, I think the FreeBSD project, we could take a page from their notebook on this. As the PCBSD guy, it sucks having to wait so long for stuff to filter down from head into stable and then finally into a release. That we can do. And then it's also a pain to be wasting a lot of time backporting things and moving stuff around. Just my 2 cents.
And part of that a little bit is being addressed by the change to the support cycle, where instead of a release being supported for a year or 2 after it comes out, point releases would be supported until 3 months after the newer version comes out, so that they could do this the smaller releases more often and get the stuff from the stable branch out to the users more quickly.
Yeah, and it's gotten better. I just, I remember when KMS came out and we had to sit on that for a long time because it was only in head and not going to get backported until 10 came out. But I don't know. That's something, I guess, wishes and stuff.
Yeah, but there are definitely advantages.
Be a little more aggressive like that.
But it kind of goes to show that even when Netflix runs current in production, it's well, if everybody's doing that, then why are we spending all this time, curating these releases?
Sure. I think the biggest deal, I run into is package APIs and stuff. If we could find some way to kind of make that work a little better, where it's okay, we're doing a new current every 6 months and the APIs don't matter, or they're stable for a certain period of time, that makes more sense. But
it's hard to balance the whole, we need to stabilize everything and stop new work or slow it down in order to make a snapshot to have a release. But at the same time, we want to, we don't want to be blocking new work from happening. And that's where the branches came from. But it goes on.
Well, you could do it kind of like FreeBSD could do it a little like we do, where we take our master branch and Git, and then we create a branch of it. Well, and we only work on that for a couple of weeks while we're getting release candidates out, and then we release. It's like a 3-week window.
A little bit.
Meanwhile, master could still be committed to
exactly.
it,
So instead of freezing head, you snapshot it into what we currently have, kind of like a stable branch, except for not as long lived, right? You MFC stuff in and get it all just right, and then ship it, and then that way
I would basically like to just cut the stable branch out and just head 6 months. Okay, we're gonna branch this off for 3 weeks, backport stuff, fix it, and then release it. But that's again my opinion. So I'm sure other FreeBSD developers have reasons why they like doing it the way it's currently done.
But anyway, back to Ted's article.
Back to the actual article. Sorry, Ted, we kind of hijacked you there for a second.
But he goes on to describe how they do the version numbers for various different things, and how some things don't have minor version numbers, right?
Like TMUX was the example that TJ gave.
Or their libc is currently version 77, which is, I guess, the Chrome approach to version numbers.
Hey, that works, you know.
Yep.
Well, I like the pull quote we got from here. Every release adds some new features, fixes some old bugs, probably adds a new bug or two, and if I have anything to say about it, removes some old
Yeah,
features.
that's
I
that
like that.
last
There's
one
some.
is kind of the difference you see between some projects and others, right? Certain ones
Hmm.
is like we just keep adding stuff and maybe stuff goes stale, but we're never going to clean it up. Whereas these guys are like,
Sure.
yeah, we're getting rid of this because, uh,
Yeah, we've replaced this now, or we have a better alternative. Like it's
yeah,
time to
or
remove
it's
the old
just,
one. You got
yeah,
6 months, you know, which is bad in a way, but in another way, it's like it's good because you're pruning the old craft, and then all people who are used to doing it the old way aren't surprised when stuff just stops working a year later.
yep.
You know. Okay, well, good deal. So next up in the headlines this week, we got an interesting article about a VAC Station 4000 Model 90. Wow, that's a throwback
Mm-hmm.
there. It's what 22 years old now,
Wow.
1992. And wait till you hear the specs on this. You know how we like to gush over, really high-end systems
Yeah.
and stuff here. This has a whopping 71 megahertz CPU, but with 128 megs of ECC RAM. So how stinking
Mm-hmm.
awesome is that? So basically, we're going to be talking about NetBSD, of course. What else would run on that?
Mm-hmm.
So,
Mm-hmm.
but we have links to YouTube videos where you can watch that. And we learned that this machine would have cost about $25,000 when it was released. And the guy who produced the video talks about his experience about getting NetBSD on it, what does and doesn't
Yep.
work. So it's interesting to see that just old hardware isn't necessarily obsolete just because newer things have come out. Well, I don't know. I may take some issue with that. I'd still say it's obsolete,
Yes.
but it still runs. It's not defective.
Well,
Like
yeah,
it's
and
just
often, that's kind of where NetBSD came from originally. It was like, well, there's all these big mainframe and other type exotic machines that they don't make an OS for anymore. So let's have a BSD derived OS that works on those.
sure, sure. So that's really cool though to see what he did. If you guys are interested in old monster machines or a little piece of history there, take a look at the video. See how he got NetBSD up and running on that old behemoth.
Yep.
So speaking of machines, let's fast forward a
Yes.
little, 20 some odd years into the future here, where we actually run on systems with 80 cores and
Yes.
whatnot.
Well,
But of
that's the
course, we're going to talk
insanity
about
now is that
yeah.
Intel just announced their new E5 V3 line, which includes the
Hmm.
E5 2699 V3, which has 18 cores plus hyperthreading.
Yeah, yeah.
So,
I need
so
one.
that 80 core machine was actually what a 4-socket machine with 4 10-core processors, and then
Hmm.
hyperthreading. Well, now you can get 72 processors in a 2-socket machine.
Dang.
So
That's
yeah,
fantastic.
I don't know if they're having a 4-socket version of that soon or not, but you could get some ridiculous numbers, and they have
Well,
quite the range on the new V3s. You can go down to like
mhm.
just quad core without hyperthreading. I think the kind of standardish one is the 2620 V3, which is 6 cores with hyperthreading, and then you can just go up higher. You can basically the processors range from $200 to $4,000 each,
Sure.
and range from 4 cores to 18, and I think 10 megs of cache to 25 megs of cache or 40 megs of cache, some
Mhm.
ridiculous amount, and crazy things. So I'm looking forward to getting some more hardware eventually with that kind of
Well,
processor in it.
speaking of that hardware, where would you go and get
Exactly.
something like that, Alan?
That was the great thing is even when Haswell was first coming out, when I was actually buying the routing machine I got, it's like, well, Haswell's not quite there yet. Most places don't have it yet. I was like, hey, IX, can you get me a Haswell one? I'm like, well, yeah, we have to get it shipped specially from Asia directly for you, but we can get that. I'm like,
Mhm.
yes. And they hooked me up with the newest chipset for the motherboard and everything, and the machine is rocking the quad gigabit and routing all my traffic.
That is awesome. That is awesome. Yeah, IX Systems, they can get a hold of that stuff. And I think looks like we got a press release even here from September 8th. So just a couple
Yeah.
days ago where they have announced their new line of servers based on the Xeon E5 V3.
Yes.
And it looks like
They've already been
yeah,
working on it and they're ready to go.
they're ready to go. They said they have a Mercury 1204H. It's a 1U system with up to 1 terabyte of DDR4 memory.
Wow.
Wow. Can be equipped with dual Intel 10 gigabyte Ethernet controllers, which is just fantastic. And of course, as you mentioned, all the Intel processor stuff.
Yep.
That's pretty stinking awesome. But they also offer some stuff for high-density multi-node servers. They have a Gemini version, which is a 2U quad-node
Yep.
system. So, yeah.
Well, yeah, because you have the complete flexibility from like low end. You can just use, even in the dual socket type system, if you use just one of the sockets, you can use half the RAM slots, half the PCI Express ports, etc. And you get, you can get a quite low end system where you're only spending $200 on the processor, or you can go up and go all the way and get 72 cores and at 2.6 gigahertz and, a terabyte of RAM.
Yeah. But iX can do that and everything in between, all the way down to your FreeNAS Mini that I think, do they still have those up on Amazon
I think so. And
okay.
Yeah, and so the power envelopes scale as well, right? You're not just talking about performance scaling, like that the little FreeNAS Mini is like 19 watts.
Yeah. Speaking of this is great. Somebody on IRC just said they still have to shovel coal into their servers. So don't be somebody who has to shovel coal into your server. You need to talk to the guys at IX now so they can get you something that brings you up to the modern age. Yes,
and like we talked about the other week, they have the True Flash now where you can get a storage appliance for your virtual machines that's all SSDs.
Mm-hmm. So again, that we should mention the URL, of course, for that, ixsystems.com/BSD Now. Fill out the form. You can download a guide of everything you need to know before you purchase a server for open source. The business case you need to make to your boss and to the company on why you guys should use IX as opposed to another vendor. And of course, you can get in touch with the sales guys there who are all BSD experts, and they can talk to BSD experts and committers and whatnot who all work at the office there. So definitely a lot of open source expertise to go around there. So
Indeed.
Again, ixsystems.com/BSD Now. And when you do go there, let them know that we sent you. That would be appreciated on our end.
They would. And, they'll treat you extra special that way too.
Yes, they will. They will. Cool. Well, we'll be back in just a moment with our next segment. And we're joined now by Ken Moore, my brother, actually, who lives locally. So he's actually here with me in my home office, even though it looks like we're coming in from two separate locations. But he's a developer at the PCBSD project, and he's here to talk to us about the Lumina desktop environment that he's heading up. So welcome to the show, Ken.
Coming.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me.
Cool. So first question we ask everyone, tell us about yourself. How did you first get involved in BSD?
Well, I would say my first involvement in BSD was when Chris started the PCBSD project way back before I went to college. He was doing all sorts of stuff, and I remember testing games on his brand new PCBSD Unix system, just, as a kid, just trying to play with things. And then when I got to college and finished up college and got to grad school and was doing a lot of programming in grad school and between schools, I got a call from Chris, and he asked me to start working part-time with PCBSD, doing testing of applications and fixing packages and, just general stuff that I could do in the evenings since I was still in graduate school. So that was kind of my first introduction to running it full-time, was doing that. And then once I finished up my master's degree, IX Systems said, hey, we want you doing this stuff all the time. So as soon as you graduate, let us know, and we'll hire you to work with PCBSD.
Cool.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's what I'm doing now.
Awesome.
Cool.
So I guess the first question is, what exactly is Lumina, and how did the idea first come to be?
Lumina is a new desktop environment designed specifically for the BSDs. And in particular, I am writing it and testing it and doing everything on PCBSD and or FreeBSD. So that's what's got all the testing. And that's really what Lumina is a complete desktop environment. It's the best way to describe it.
Why'd you get the idea to do it, though? Like, what was...
I would say I got the idea because I used to jump around between desktop environments and PCBSD all the time. I mean, because it's based on FreeBSD, it's not like a Linux distro where you're tied and stuck in one desktop very easily. I could just install other desktops, log out, and log into the new desktop and play around with things. I did that a lot, but I just kept running into all sorts of strange, unexplained, weird issues, and whenever I tracked them down, it always somehow related to some kind of Linux system that wasn't ported properly or just didn't function properly, or all the little utilities that came with something might not work anymore because, it expected this from Linux. So I was like, okay, we just need something that's light and fast because the desktop really is secondary. It's just there to let people run applications and to get work done. It's not there to be the primary thing that you look
Right.
at. If you spend all your time looking at a desktop, you should really just turn it off and go outside for a walk or something. Just go do something else. So it needs to be extremely light and just let you run your applications and get your work done as quickly and as efficiently as possible. And that's kind of the idea behind Lumina as well.
Cool. So is it a strictly a floating desktop environment, or does it do tiling as well? What's like typical?
It uses Fluxbox for the window manager, and it is a floating window manager, but it does have a couple different tiling options or tiling-like options for how it puts windows on the screen. And there is a configuration option in Lumina. If you go to the session options, you can say, oh, I want to use the Fluxbox, put windows in rows or put windows in columns options. But at heart, it still is a floating window manager.
Cool. So what are some of the unique features compared to something like, say, GNOME or KDE?
Some of the unique features, one, it's extremely light and it does not have dependencies on a lot of the Linux stuff like systemd or Pulse Audio or HAL. Dbus. Yeah, it doesn't have any explicit dependencies on any of that. I mean, if you install it on your system and you're using it, great. I mean, Lumina doesn't really care. You can run it if you want, or you can just not run it, and Lumina will still function perfectly fine. So that's kind of the biggest thing, is what it doesn't have. But what it does have is it's also got a little bit better integration with ZFS in particular, because on PCBSD, everything is ZFS based. I actually built into the file manager a whole ZFS file restore functionality. So just as you're browsing your system, if you have snapshots of that directory on your system, you just get a little button in the corner and it says, oh, you have older versions. And then you click in there and you've got your slider functionality to go backwards in time through different snapshots and say, oh, okay, I want to grab that file, restore it, and it'll put it back in the directory for you.
Cool.
So it's very quick, very easy. And there's a bunch of other little simplifications and things like that, so that you don't need to run, or have 50 different daemons or 50 different applications installed on your system just to do some very basic functionality and just to use the system.
Right. Cool. So will Lumina ever have a portable version for other OSs or maybe at least other BSDs, or will it just be free PC exclusive?
It is actually highly portable. There is only a single class and a single source file that you would need to modify for your particular operating system. It's if you go into our source tree in the lib Lumina directory, the Lumina library, there is a particular class called Lumina OS dash and then your OS name. So right now we have Lumina OS dash FreeBSD, and that's what we use by default. That's the one I keep up to date and maintain for PCBSD and FreeBSD. And recently we've also had other people committing a Lumina OS-Linux as well, so that people can package it and run it on things like Debian and stuff like that. But it's extremely portable. It's just that one simple class. And basically it's just, oh, which external utility are you going to run to change the audio volume or whatever? And it would be the shortcut for that, so that Lumina is aware of it. It's just a lot of little things like that. So it's very easy to port. As long as you have Qt on your system and have Fluxbox, you should be good to go.
So what are some of the requirements to run Lumina?
It uses Fluxbox for the window manager. It uses Qt and a bunch of the Qt modules for building and running, as well as the Qt phonon layer for like audio output and stuff. Other than that, let me think. There's a few X utilities as well. So like the X composite library, the X render library. There's also X brightness for brightness control, and I think that's about it.
Right, but not so much.
But again, X brightness can be changed as too. It's extremely light. It's extremely
less so
light.
Like dependencies, but like hardware requigants. Or like how much memory does it take and things like that?
I run it on a little netbook with a 1.2 gigahertz processor, a little Atom netbook with 2 gigs of RAM, and it chugs along very, very well. It only uses about, let's say, 0.5% CPU and a little over 100 megabytes, 120 megabytes of RAM, and that's for the entire system, not just Lumina. Lumina uses less than that.
Very good.
Yeah, it's definitely very
light.
Cool.
So are there any interesting FreeBSD or PCBSD features that it will take advantage of aside from the ZFS you mentioned? Do you have any other plans?
Not at the moment for stuff that's just available. I have a whole list of new utilities and new daemons that I would like to write, which will be completely optional, and I would like to commit those to FreeBSD and integrate them into Lumina. Things like parental control systems, something like a graphical sudo as well, so that you can say, oh, this user only has permission to run these 3 utilities or whatever. Kind of like for if you're setting up a kiosk at a place and you only want them to be able to click that one icon on the desktop to run that one application. It just doesn't let that user launch anything else. Just some little things like that that I would like to include.
Cool. Are you looking at expanding the development team at all, or is there certain things that you're not really able to do that you're looking for other people to help with?
Right now, I would love for somebody to kind of take over submitting patches and bug fixes to Fluxbox. I'm running into a fair number of issues with just how they work with some of the ICCC and Extended Window Manager hints functions. They like reserving screen space for the panel. There's some bugs and stuff with regards to Fluxbox in that, and I'd really like to have somebody step up and say, hey, let me know your Fluxbox bugs. I'll actually fix those in Fluxbox and make sure they're committed there. So, I mean, that's the #1 place I would love to get people involved. But as far as that, it's all on Git.
Mm-hmm.
Just send in patches, send in bug fixes. If you want to write plugins, like for the panel or for the desktop, they're extremely simple. You just need to subclass the one plugin class that I have. And then aside from that, it's like a standalone Qt application. So you got all your Qt widgets. For instance, the little calendar plugin that I have for Lumina, that was a single file. It just says, oh, okay, I want to take the Qt calendar widget, and I'm just going to embed that into the plugin class. And there we go.
Cool.
Now you have a full desktop plugin for a calendar. So it's extremely easy. If you want to do that, take a couple hours on a weekend or something, send that in.
Awesome.
Cool. So we're at version, I guess, 0.62, which is beta/alpha.
Yeah.
But what's the future look like? Where are you planning on going from here?
I've got a couple other utilities that I'm still working on writing. The main one you'll notice right now is there's really no search functionality in Lumina. A lot of people say, wait a minute, where's the little box to do a search for a file or a search for an application? Or when I hit Alt F2 and I start typing the name of the application, it doesn't find it right away to let me launch it, like a quick launching utility. That's the one thing I'm going to work on next. I'm actually going to combine both of those. So one half of it will be the quick launching utility. So you just start typing and it'll try and match it or find the application. And then I'll have a tab in there as well saying, no, I want to do actually a full search of my user directory and see if I can find, some file with an extension, whatever you're looking for that might take a little bit longer. So that's one of the things I want to work on. That's the next, I think that's the last standalone utility I want to write for Lumina. Aside from that, there's just tons of other little bug fixes and features and plugins and just all sorts of little things that have to get improved upon or added to. I also want to revamp the file manager interface just a little bit so that it's easier for people to tell on the side. For instance, if you have, I'm trying to write things with touchscreens in mind. And right now, you kind of need to right-click on an item in order to do things like cut and paste. So I would like to have an optional little menu on the side that you can open up so you just have buttons that you could hit with like a touch screen or something to do things like cut and paste. So, I've got little things here and there and tweaking designs for the UIs and just making things look better too.
I guess for laptop-oriented stuff, more power management utilities probably be very useful.
Yes, that would also be nice.
Of course, that mostly, I guess you're just working with the tool, the functionality that's already there. You're just exposing it to the user in an interesting way. So
providing more of a front end to it.
Yeah, that's what I do. Is because I base it all on FreeBSD, I just kind of look at the FreeBSD operating system and see, okay, what's available? Oh, they've got a battery monitor right here. Okay, I'll just write how to use that battery monitor in my Lumina OS-FreeBSD file and say, okay, run this command, and then this is how I pull out, what the current battery level is or how much time it has remaining, something like that. So it's pulling directly from the operating system and trying to do that without the addition of
I'll have to try that. I'll have to try that out and see if I can confuse it with my laptop that has 2 batteries.
Oh, hey, there you go.
That might, because it might pick up only the first battery.
Exactly.
I'm not
That's
sure.
what I'm thinking. It also it
There you
depends
go.
which utility you use. I think it's APM or whatever combines them all into one total for you, like as far as percent discharge or whatever.
Well, you are in
But-
luck. You are in luck then, because I am using APM.
Right, but the I think it's ACPI info gives much more detailed information,
Yes.
but you have to specify which battery.
Yeah.
Exactly. I kind of got the impression that APM was a front end to the ACPI info, because ACPI info gave all sorts of like voltages
Yes.
and stuff like that, and then you're expected to calculate everything, whereas APM does most of those calculations and just says this percent.
Yeah.
So
Interesting. Was there anything else you wanted to touch on before we let you go?
no, that's about it. One thing that I would really love to see is I would love to hear from somebody on OpenBSD or NetBSD who wants to get Lumina running on their system. I haven't heard from any of you yet, and please contact me.
Yeah, come on. Don't let the Linux guys steal it first.
Exactly.
On all
It's
the
like
BSDs.
I wrote Lumina to be extremely portable, and I'm glad that Linux people are, really wanting to run this in too. But come on, OpenBSD and NetBSD and Dragonfly BSD guys, I kind of wrote it for you also. Why not talk to me, and we'll get a version for you too.
Yeah.
Well, we should mention too, Ken's going to be giving a talk at Ohio Linux Fest.
Yes.
When is that happening?
End of October, I believe it is.
Okay, end of October. So if you're in the Ohio area,
Yep.
try and make it up to that, and you can see Ken or any of the IX guys who happen to come out to that one. Usually
Exactly.
Drew's out there.
Yeah.
So definitely check that out. So thanks for being on the show with us today.
Thank
Ken.
you for
Yes,
having
thank
me.
you. And stay tuned later. We'll have Ken and Chris did a nice little walkthrough of Lumina, and we'll have that in the tutorial segment of the
Yes,
show.
we did.
Yep, we'll show that off later. So we're not done yet. Cool.
Nope.
All right, well, thanks, Ken, and we'll be back with our next segment in just a moment. Okay, we're back, and we're going to go ahead and go into our news roundup here in a second. But before we do, we want to mention one of the other sponsors on the show, of course, which is Tarsnap. And the URL for that is tarsnap.com/BSD Now. Let them know that we sent you, of course. But if you're not doing backups, you need to be doing backups, especially off-site.
Yep.
And if you're going to do them off-site, do you trust the company that has access to all your data or potentially whatever sensitive data you packed up? Well, you don't have to trust Tarsnap. That's the beauty, because it's encrypted. So.
Yes, and the client is open source so that you can make sure it's actually encrypted as the way they say it is. And the other great thing is it's pay-as-you-go. So you just put some money in your account and use it. So you can't ever use more money than you already put in the account, so you can be sure you're not going to have a surprise bill.
That's right. So
very nicely priced at 25 cents per gigabyte or 250 pico dollars per byte month. Colin is such a mad nerd.
And not just for BSD. I mean, Linux, Windows, you name it. They have clients for just about everything out there. I don't know about that VAX we talked about earlier. Maybe I don't know.
It doesn't
maybe
mention it
client for that.
specifically, but if you're running NetBSD on the VAX, it should just work.
There you go. Cool. So again, tarsnap.com/BSD Now, and let them know that we sent you. Okay, let's get into the news roundup. So we got a new, a walkthrough here on an intrusion detection system called Suricata.
Yes.
Is that how you pronounce it?
Suricata. It's I guess a plugin for pfSense.
Okay, so yeah, that's what we're going to talk about. It's a plugin for pfSense specifically, and the guide we're going to link to in the show notes here that you'll want to take a look at. It goes through the steps of course, installing and configuring on a public-facing pfSense box. They have a part 2 and I guess it's a pretty lengthy article here, where they detail some of the configuration steps. And another cool thing about Suricata is that it's compatible with snort rules. So if you're already familiar with that or have that set up, you can use some of the same updates. So that's pretty slick.
Yes, and
we also
it recognizes the most common protocols automatically, so you can write rules to the protocol rather than basing on what port it's on. So you can find stuff when it's running on a different port than usual, and just have more dynamic rules. Also, it can identify thousands of different file types. I'm guessing using libmagic or something, and so you can actually, restrict based on that as well, not just on what port it's running on, and kind of less advanced stuff like that.
Very cool. We also have another link to a recent post about Snort as well, if that's more your style. So you want to take a look at that. And of course, if you run pfSense or pretty much any BSD as an edge router for a lot of users, this is something you should probably consider looking into.
Yep, especially if you've got a lot of users behind it.
Yes, definitely. Just to make sure everything is as secure as it's supposed to be and not been broken
Right.
into.
Well, because in general, your firewall's set up to prevent stuff from getting into your network. But your firewall often isn't doing anything to detect when a machine inside your network is misbehaving. Right. So having this, you can do things like detect that Windows machine over there has become infected and is trying to scan out on the internet or is trying to, load a stronger version of the virus off some other website or something.
Sure.
And so
it's doing naughty things and must be squashed.
Exactly. So that's where the intrusion detection system comes in, is, defense in depth, right? You have the firewall making sure that, trying to make sure that nothing gets in, but what happens when something's already inside? You need to deal with it. And so something like Snort or Suricata is definitely worth looking at. And so we have a two-parter on Suricata and the other one on Snort, so that you can get a start and take a look at it.
Yep. So this is an interesting one we have in the headlines, or a roundup this week. OpenBSD is doing a project on systemd API emulation.
Well, it's a couple of specific things. Of course, Phoronix kind of wrote their entire article based on the one paragraph summary for the Google Summer of Code, rather than actually looking at what the project's actually doing per se. Sure. But it provides replacements for a bunch of the required components like systemd hostnamed, which I forget what it was based on specifically, but it was something that wouldn't really make sense on BSD. So there's a replacement that would come up with a systemd compatible version of the hostname of the machine. And locality for dealing with different languages, and time date D, because I guess you need to know what time it is, and things like that. And they're basically hoping to allow systemd-dependent components, like newer versions of GNOME, to run on OpenBSD, rather than simulating porting all of systemd over. It's just the components we need to get GNOME to work.
Or having to rewrite those components and maintain massive patch sets for GNOME and stuff. I've seen some of that happen in the FreeBSD port tree, and that's not pleasant.
Right. So they're like, can we put in little, stubs that will get us far enough to make GNOME just behave properly?
So I love this comment TJ put in here. There was consideration from some Linux users to port over the finished emulation back to Linux so they wouldn't have to run systemd either. That's irony.
That feeds back into our top story earlier about people running away from
our own system now, so we don't have to run it.
There's a particularly interesting /dot comment. That's unusual. It says, we are currently migrating a large number, much larger than planned after initial result, of their systems from Red Hat Enterprise Linux to BSD, a decision taken due to general unhappiness with the new Red Hat Enterprise Linux, but also just systemd kind of pushing them even further, right? So they weren't very happy with Red Hat Enterprise Linux 6, and then 7 was going to be more of that plus systemd, so they kind of pushed them to adopt even more BSDs sooner than they had planned. And they said so far they're getting about 10% more performance through their machines. I remember on my sysadmin podcast, we talked to a place that wouldn't tell us, a guy wouldn't tell us where he worked, but it's a certificate authority. And they found that I think their infrastructure is based on VMware or something, but by replacing some of their CentOS machines with FreeBSD machines, they were getting about 25% more performance as far as how many certificates they could sign. And
that's cool.
The other thing was it just made it easier to have newer versions of OpenSSL because they could just get it from ports rather than, the Red Hat system is kind of, you're stuck with this version for the entire life of the major release.
Well, the rest of that quote, too, is kind of cool. He said the relearning curve wasn't as steep as they expected. General system stability seems to be better, too. And he says, of course, the BSD security reputation goes without saying.
I think the biggest, cool. There are a bunch of things that are different in BSD. They usually tend to be fairly logical, and once you know the differences, it's not that hard to go back and forth.
It's not. So a couple things about the systemd, API emulation. He said it will not be in the base system. It's only in ports and only installed as a dependency for things like a newer GNOME, for example, as we mentioned.
I think that makes a lot of sense, especially since it's probably going to need to be updated in step with GNOME in order to keep up. And it's just things in the port tree can be updated faster than things in the base system. So I think putting more and more into the ports tree and less in the base system helps with just making sure that those utilities can keep up faster.
So who's going to take up the challenge and port that to FreeBSD? I would like that. And by like that, I mean like tomorrow.
Yes.
So,
the closing comment here is that in the long run, BSD will be safe from systemd's reign of terror, but hopefully we'll have enough compatibility that third-party packages like GNOME that insist on using it will still work.
mm-hmm. Definitely. That's what we'd want it for in particular. There's a lot of GNOME people out there who really want to run GNOME 3, and we have a GNOME 3 version. It's been in beta forever. It's still not in the FreeBSD ports tree, and we've been rolling it for about a year. And I'm sure this would make the porting process a lot easier. Cool. Okay. Well, next up in the roundup, we have a Ghost BSD 4 preview.
Yes.
Link to that on the linuxbsdos.com site. So they talk about the Ghost BSD project. It is moving along. It's slowly getting closer to their 4 release. The article shows off some of the progress that's been made, includes a lot of screenshots and some of the interesting graphical front ends, like their installer, for example. Mm-hmm. So if you're not too familiar with Ghost BSD, we did interview the lead developer a while back.
Yes, we did.
So we'll have the link to the show notes for that as well. So you can take a look at that. And I'm not sure, did they have a release date mentioned in here? I didn't see it in the article.
One. I think it's when it's ready.
When it's ready. Okay. Well, good deal. So it'll be out when it's ready.
Yep.
And what are they running for their desktop? Is that GNOME 3? Or no, it's Mate.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Because originally it was based on GNOME, but then they switched to Mate because GNOME 3 wasn't going to be happy. Mate 1.8.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, well, he says in the picture, it looks like this is Mate 1.6. So
yes, it's powered by Mate 6. The latest edition of Mate available is 1.8. Okay, so it is 1.6.
That's right. Okay. Well, good deal. So you'll want to take a look at that article if you're interested in seeing how Ghost BSD is progressing. Mm-hmm. Next up, we have some more NetBSD news running on other hardware. And, of course, this week we're going to be talking about the Banana Pi, which is already making me hungry after reading that. But
apparently the tasty alternative to the Raspberry Pi.
Yes. Very tasty without the seeds. Mm-hmm. I like that. With similar hardware specs. So in the blog post, we have an article about a NetBSD developer detailing his experience in getting NetBSD to run on it. So he says after he studied a little bit about how pre-built Linux image booted, he made some notes and started hacking. Unfortunately, Ethernet is one of the few things not working, is being looked at, and he's hoping to get it fully supported for the upcoming NetBSD 7.0.
So I guess the interesting difference between a Raspberry Pi, which is ARMv6, is the Banana Pi is ARMv7 based, so apparently has potential to be much faster. I know there was a lot of people were looking forward to ARMv6 going away, and then the Raspberry Pi basically is ensured that it'll never die.
That's right.
It's interesting to see some ARMv7 in a device that's mostly compatible with the Raspberry Pi.
So they said it's about $65. Mm-hmm. It's a little more expensive, but it has SATA, gigabit Ethernet, dual-core CPU, and about 1 gig of RAM.
Yes.
So that's a pretty decent little
If they had
box.
that with dual gigabit Ethernet, it would make like the best router ever.
Definitely. Yeah, and every time I see these, I have a couple Pis here, and every time I'm like, oh, I'd really like to make a full package repo for that and like have a fully supported PCBSD Pi version. But
alas, Sean Bruno is working on the QEMU stuff to be able to compile the packages on an AMD 64, so it won't take a year to.
They added some of that to Podre already.
Yes,
where it does the QEMU
bits. Yes, and he's working on the stuff that needs to go into QEMU and getting that upstreamed.
That's awesome. Yes. That's awesome. Keep up the work,
Yes,
Sean.
we're going to have him on. Tell us about that.
Yeah. How has he avoided us this whole time?
Well, he just switched jobs, so we were letting him.
Okay.
But yeah.
Well, we're going to hunt him down. Maybe he'll be at Euro or Meet BSD or somewhere we can get a hold of him. Well, cool. Okay. Well, that's the end of our weekly roundup. We'll be back in just a moment with our next segment. Okay, and we're back with our feedback segment for the week, and got a couple questions here we need to answer. Well, a few. So first up is Antonio asking about ZFS backups. So he says, hey guys, I have a question concerning backing up a ZFS dataset to an external hard drive. I really don't have many backup options due to size, data, budget limits, etc. for the data that he currently has on his FreeNAS box. He has heard in passing you guys mention that data sets can be backed up to an external device. So how would I go about doing this with my current FreeNAS setup? I have a very basic setup, and each data set is 2.5 terabytes that will be backed up to a 3 terabyte external drive. Any help would be greatly appreciated. Thanks, and keep up the awesome work.
Yeah, I don't know how easy it would be to do that in the built-in tools in FreeNAS. I'm pretty sure they kind of assume you're SSHing to another FreeNAS.
Correct.
But if you can drop to the shell, then you can use something like the ZX for script or one of them, or just manually ZFS send and so on.
Yeah, CFS send
to take any snapshot. So it has to be a snapshot, so you can make a fresh one, and then you're only missing 10 seconds of data or whatever. And then you just create a second ZFS pool on the external drive and replicate from one to the other. And then that external hard drive has all that data on it, 2.5 terabytes or whatever. And because of that, you can do incremental backup. So you disconnect it, and then, a day later or a week later or whatever, connect it up again, and you only have to copy the data that's changed in that time. So you're not going to be writing that data over and over again, and that'll help make the external drive last longer and the backups take less time.
Sure. Yeah, that would probably be your easiest way to do it. Like I said, I think Alan's right here. The FreeNAS built-in stuff is going to expect you to be SSHing. So if you can connect that to another machine, you could potentially use their built-in utilities and set it as a remote SSH target. Yeah. But in the meanwhile, what Alan describes is probably going to be your best bet.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to see if maybe FreeNAS could actually grow an option for doing that to an external drive.
Yeah, that would be definitely helpful. Very cool.
Yeah.
Okay, well, next up, question from Girajan asking about Beehive. He says, hello, I'd like to point out conclusively that Beehive is a Type 1 or native hypervisor. It's in the same league as KVM, ESXi, Xen, or Hyper-V. This is because it doesn't run on top of an OS as an application, such as VirtualBox Parallels, but is the OS. Many people would argue it isn't truly bare metal. However, the fatness of the OS is a red herring. It's called bare metal because the hypervisor is running on the metal, not the VM. I know the whole front page of Beehive calls it a Type 2. I don't know what could have possessed them, but the whole world just repeats the same info without examining the facts first. I think this generated some traffic.
A little bit. Like, it's obviously the definitions don't fit exactly either way, because is the hypervisor, if the hypervisor runs on the bare metal and doesn't have an OS, then that would mean you couldn't run other applications directly on the bare metal, right? And so since, Beehive is, I would say, closer to VirtualBox than it is to ESXi.
Sure.
Although,
yeah, I would agree.
Yeah, and then when he mentioned Xen, there's a difference there as well. There's like Xen Center, which is, doesn't have an OS under it, it's bare metal. But then there's Xen that's, you're running on top of Linux, and, it's the whole machine, and you're just running virtual machines closer to something like VirtualBox. So in the end, I would say I'm not sure I see the difference between VirtualBox and Beehive that would make them end up in different classifications. Just because there's a kernel module, but that kernel module is mostly just about accessing the hardware virtualization stuff. In general, when Beehive needs to allocate memory, it does that through the FreeBSD memory subsystem, not directly talking to the hardware.
Sure.
So yeah, I think Beehive kind of defies the classification either way, but I think
it's a thing.
They decided that it was Type 2 because it's running on top of FreeBSD, not instead of FreeBSD.
Yeah, you're still installing FreeBSD to run Beehive at the end of the day.
And you can run things other than Beehive as well, right? It's I would say closer to VirtualBox than it is to something like ESXi.
Correct.
But yeah, that one's... The problem there is the definitions aren't exact enough, not that maybe it was misclassified.
Yep. Okay, well, hopefully that'll clear up a little bit of confusion out there.
Erno writes in about pfSense and a FreeNAS. So he says he's mostly a Linux user for his desktop and laptops, but after listening to BSD Now quite a bit, he's got attracted to the BSDs. So he recently installed a pfSense router, which is working great, and he has since added a FreeNAS on a spare machine to serve as his file server, and that's working well as well. However, he's trying to connect the two and having some issues. He says he's able to access the FreeNAS via the web graphical interface, but the way he sorted it out, he says is pfSense that has 2 network cards, or 3. One goes out to the internet, and RE0 goes to his wireless router, and that's how all the clients on his LAN connect, and they access the internet. But the pfSense is directly connected to the RE1 interface, so it's on a separate network. And I'm guessing he's having a little bit of trouble with configuring his pfSense because he says currently his RE1 interface, which he's named FreeNAS, and set up firewall rules identical to the RE0 interface. But his FreeNAS box can't connect out to the internet. So I'm wondering if he's missing some rules on the NAT rules so that you would actually translate traffic. I'm trying to... He wrote in with that, and then I asked for more detail, and he sent in a dump of the rules, and I was just looking over them here and seeing... the NAT rules normally go at the... right. Because the way he dumped the rules, the NAT rules weren't included, which I think are the ones that are causing him the problem. This question, I think you might be better off asking specifically on the pfSense forum.
Sure.
Because it seems there's a question there. But you might also look at, with the pfCTL, looking at dumping the NAT rules instead of your regular rules. So I think it's -s NAT instead of -s rules. And that might, you might be able to see, just by looking at it there, see the difference between your NAT rules, and maybe you're not natting that interface out. The other thing is, if you drop to the shell on your pfSense there, running TCP dump on the RE1 interface and seeing, when you're trying to connect out from the pfSense, from the FreeNAS, does the pfSense see the packets coming in? Yes. Then switch the TCP dump to your FXP interface, the one that's facing the internet, and hopefully you should see the packets coming across and going out. But if you see the source address still as your internal IP address, then they're not being natted, and so the packet goes out to the internet, but it gets dropped because it's got an invalid source address. Whereas, if the packet isn't showing up on the FXP interface, then you know that it's not making it through the firewall. And if it's showing up with the wrong addresses, it's not getting natted, and you can see what's going on there.
Cool.
So hopefully that leads them down the right path to solve the problem.
Yep. All right, our last question is from Brandon asking about package NG. So he says, first off, the often stated, I'm a fan of your show. Thank you. He says, I really enjoy the content. I'm looking forward to it each week. I was a longtime GNU Linux user, and the show had me almost biting at the bit to check out the BSD land of things. After having checked out FreeBSD, I haven't ventured much further. I love how things are documented there and how they generally function, that is to say logically. I can't believe how long I waited to see how the BSDs accomplish things I wish I had known sooner. I really prefer it. So now for the question. This is for FreeBSD's package NG. He said, I noticed that once I've installed a package, I can look and see what build options it was built with. I often do this to save myself some time if they are already what I would use from the ports tree. But I haven't been able to find a way to actually see what it was built with ahead of time with a package command. I would have assumed package query, but that does not work for this purpose. I've resorted to going to FreshPorts and looking at the defaults on that page. I'm not sure if that's 100% accurate across the board or not, though. Do you guys know a way to find out what options a package was built with, short of installing it and then checking? Thanks, and keep up the great work.
Yeah, so, this one, do you know the answer? I do.
I was going to say package R query would be the way
so,
I would
when you run package query, that's querying the package database on your computer of what's installed on your computer. Whereas R query is actually going to query the downloaded copy of the database from the repository, which will have all the apps you haven't installed yet.
Yes, and that's where you can check and find out like build options and various other things that are related to packages you're potentially
give me a list of
install.
Everything that depends on this, or you can do anything, right? It's SQL.
What it's going to suck in as dependencies. Yeah, it does all that.
So that if you do man package -r query, that'll bring up the man page, or I think it's package help R query will do the same thing, and it defines all the variables so you can get the row you expect, and you can find out the build options without having to download the package.
Actually, I'm looking at that. Are you sure 137 does that? Does the list of... Oh, yeah, here it is. Yeah, it's %O is the flag. Yeah. Okay, yeah. So that would be all you got to do.
Yeah,
it'll be in there, including licenses, shared libraries, etc.
I understand why he would assume package query would do it, but that's for querying what's already installed in your system.
Yeah.
So it's R query to query the repo.
And the syntax is almost the same.
Yeah, and if you have multiple repos running, you might have to specify which one when you query, or it might do all. I'm not sure. But the man page will say.
Yes.
And most people by default wouldn't have multiple repositories anyway.
Correct.
So that's
cool.
So what's in FreshPort should be correct, because that's the default, and that's what the FreeBSD packages are built with, the defaults. But yes, it's definitely handy because I run a custom repo, and I have a couple of different package sets, and sometimes I'm like, which one of these has Nginx with this option turned on? And so yeah, you can definitely check that out.
We run our own repo as well, and we use a lot of different options.
Yes.
So that's how we display it in our graphical utilities. Cool. Well, hopefully that answered your question there, and we wish you luck, and we're glad you're enjoying BSD. We are ready to wrap up the show now, Alan.
Yep.
And of course, as we do, we'll mention the usual, that all the tutorials will be posted in their entirety at bsdnow.tv. So please go back, take a look at that if there's something you want to reference.
There's usually more detail there than what we managed to cover on the show, because not all of it translates into something. I'm not just going to sit there and read the whole thing.
Well, and seeing a comp file actually written out on the screen is much more helpful.
Yes, exactly.
So also send your questions, comments, show ideas, or topics, or stories you want mentioned on the show to feedback@bsdnow.tv. That's where we monitor. You'll probably get a response back from TJ, our producer, very quickly. He's pretty fast about that. Also, we want to mention that Lumina, which we talked about this week on the show, was committed to the ports tree. So it is available in FreeBSD ports, and you can go ahead and try it out now if you'd like. And of course, it's available in PCBSD 10.03 as a package as well, so you can grab it that way. Also, there's a new OS conference, OperatingSystems.io, being held November 25th in London, and they're looking for people who want to give BSD presentations. It's actually being run by a NetBSD developer, so if that's something you can get out to or you're local to and could present on BSD, please get in touch with them. I'm sure they would appreciate that.
All those people in London and Cambridge need to make sure we have a good showing there.
Yeah. Short train trip, you need to come on down and do that. This year's Hackfest 2014 will be held November 7th and 8th in Quebec, and will feature a presentation by Theo de Rat. So mark your calendar and get out there if you're in the area. They also have told us it probably will not be recorded, so maybe someone should go and record that and send it to us so we can post a link to that on YouTube. Also, check out the show notes for info and links to both these conferences, as well as all the stories we mentioned today. And if you'd like to watch live, if you're watching this, say, Friday or later on a podcast, you can always watch us live Wednesdays at 2 p.m. Eastern or 1800 UTC. We'd love to have you with us and be able to chat with you on IRC during the same time. And of course, stay tuned for the Lumina walkthrough we're going to do in just a moment, showing off the BSD licensed desktop. So thanks for being with us on the show today. Really appreciate it. See you same time next week. We're joined now by Ken Moore, my brother actually, who's the author of the Lumina desktop that we're going to be taking a look at and doing a short tutorial of. So welcome to the show, Ken.
Hi, Chris. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, glad to have you here. So I'll let you take this away. This is kind of your tutorial, so you drive it, and I'll chime in every now and then if I have a question. So.
All right, well, what we're looking at here is the basic desktop of Lumina. It's just been slightly configured for demonstration purposes. I've added a couple desktop plugins, but other than that, this is the default desktop for Lumina on PCBSD 10.0.3. A couple things I want to point out about Lumina before we get going. First, it is a BSD licensed desktop environment under the 3-clause BSD license. It is created and designed specifically on FreeBSD. It is not created on Linux and ported to FreeBSD. It's written natively for FreeBSD. It is light on dependencies and CPU and memory. It is extremely light. It doesn't.
What are the dependencies, by the way, if you don't mind me interrupting?
Most of the dependencies are just a few X utilities, Xorg, and then mainly Qt and some of the Qt build modules.
Okay, so it's Qt based. Okay, cool.
Yes. And then the only other dependency I can think of would be Fluxbox, which I use for the window manager at the moment. And then CPU memory usage, I did a few tests on my little netbook recently, and it was running less than 0.5% CPU usage, and memory-wise for the entire system was around 120 megabytes, give or take, depending on what you had running on the system. So it's extremely light, extremely fast. This is Lumina version 0.6.2. This is the version that is shipping with PCBSD 10.0.3. It is still a beta. I'm still doing a lot of active development on it, and there are a few little utilities that are still being written, and graphically things could change, like in the plugin systems and different little windows that open up. There's still a lot of change going on there. So it's still beta quality, but stability-wise, it's still quite stable.
I'll mention also for FreeBSD users, you can grab it out of the ports tree. We committed a port last week, and it's under X11 Lumina.
Yes. All right, so now that we've seen the home screen, let's go ahead and kick this off and start taking a look at what some of these things are that are on the desktop. First things first, let's start up in the upper left corner. This is what's called the user button. If you look at the panel plugins list, this would be your replacement for your traditional system of desktop icons and allow you to quickly register applications for quick use. So here I've opened the window and you can see very clearly that this would be what would normally be on your desktop. You have your shortcuts to applications, for instance the App Cafe here. If you have links to directories, you would show them in here, and if you have other files on your desktop, you would show them in here. So all of your favorites are very easily accessed right from here, and if you hit the minus button, you can remove them from your desktop folder or remove them from your favorites list. If you go over to the System Applications tab, that's where you can run and see all the different applications that are on your system for all sorts of different stuff. You got your networking utilities, you got your development and education utilities, all sorts of stuff. Now, if you're on PCBSD, you will also see that you have a shortcut directly to the App Cafe right from there. If there's an application that you want that you don't see is installed on the system, you just click on that button to open up the App Cafe and install something else, or to remove things from your system. That's your package manager. So you have a quick link to that. The next tab is your home directory. So any of the folders or directories that you have in your home, it gives you quick links directly to those. And then any configuration utilities for Lumina as well. So for instance, there's a link to the PCBSD control panel in here. If you have it installed, if you're not on a PCBSD system, that button is just gone, it's just hidden. The utility for configuring Lumina so that you can make changes and then modify your screensaver and other little utilities like that. So it's all here within the user button. Quick shortcuts to everything that you would need on the system. Now let's move across. You got your standard task manager here with a button for every window that's open, just like every other desktop that you would have. Same with the system tray up here. You run your applications, and if they are system tray applications, they'll show up with an icon in there, and then you can click on them and do whatever it would be at the moment for your system tray. A simple clock, and then this is the other main plugin utility. It's called the system dashboard. This is where you can do things like changing your audio volume, changing your screen brightness, which does work on every single system. If you have a battery on your system, it'll display what the status of it is. For instance, in this case, we're at 96% and it's charging. And then also, if you have multiple virtual desktops or workspaces, you can switch between them right here as well. Just going between desktop 1, desktop 2, whatever you would need. And that would be the system dashboard, and then it's also where you can log out. One of the other things that you can do on the main desktop is that these are all plugins. So everything on the desktop right now is plugin based. So I have added a quick shortcut to the App Cafe onto my desktop just as a plugin. So I can click that, and I have my traditional desktop icon that launches the App Cafe in this instance. I also added a calendar widget down there. The plugin system is still very new, so there aren't a lot to choose from. There's actually only those two plugins at the moment, the calendar and then a generic application launcher that you can set up for any application. But we'll be adding more as time goes on as well. If you happen to right-click on the desktop, you can also see a few quick shortcuts and options as well. By default, you have a link to open an Xterm, so you can get to the terminal, opening the file manager. Again, your applications menu with a few quick shortcuts at the top again for the control panel and the App Cafe. Basic settings, and then log out, and then there's one called Unlock Desktop. This is for the desktop plugin system, so that when you unlock your desktop, then all of your plugins can be dragged around and moved, and you can even remove them by closing it like that. And then do whatever you want. You can resize them as well. Now this one obviously won't resize all that much because there's really nothing to it, but there you go. And then you also have the option when the desktop is unlocked to actually resize them and snap them to an invisible grid. And then when you're done, you can just lock it again, and there you go. All right, so that's just the basic desktop interface. Is there anything you want to add, Chris, before we go on?
I want to see the config stuff, so that's cool.
Okay. Well, let's go into the desktop configuration then. So let's see how to modify Lumina. So let's go into desktop configuration, and it opens up a little utility called Lumina-config if you run it from the command line. And so right here you can see it's just very simple, everything that you would need for the system. So if you want to change your wallpapers right here, you can see what the screen resolution is for your current screen. If you have multiple screens set up, actually it gives you more additional options and lets you set everything on a per screen basis. So it's very nice for multiple monitor setups as well. So for instance here, if I go ahead and hit plus on the wallpapers, I can go select a new wallpaper, and well, let's just grab one out of here. And there's the purple Lumina wallpaper as well. If you hit save, it automatically takes effect. You can also set up multiple wallpapers and have it rotate over a certain time period and everything that you would want. You also have the option to add your desktop plugins here. So for instance, if I select the calendar plugin and then hit add, you can see the calendar appear on the desktop right away. And then you can unlock your desktop and drag it wherever you want it to go and stuff like that. So that's the basics of the desktop panel. Very simple, very easy. If we go over to the panels page now we can actually modify the panels. The panel will be this top part of the screen here, and Lumina has support for 2 panels on any given screen at the moment. So you can change the location to any of the screen edges for a panel. You can change what size you want, and that's in pixels, by the way. So you can just make it larger, make it smaller. Just for example, make it larger. Video coding's doing something, and then you can also add, remove, and move around plugins in here. So if I just move things around, things should switch. Yeah.
Okay, cool.
So that's the panels, and then
for people like me who want their panel always at the bottom, like that's the first place I would
yes,
go.
Exactly. There are a lot of things that you can do to return it to a standard window manager, desktop KDE environment kind of thing. It's very easy to do that. So the menu shortcut, that would be what corresponds to the right-click menu on here. You can basically modify anything you want on the right-click menu between the workspace label telling you which workspace you're on and the lock desktop button. So between there you can add, remove, whatever you want. And again, that operates through plugins as well. So there's a few different plugins in here. You can add specific links to applications or separators, all sorts of things like that. And that's all within there as well. Keyboard shortcuts. If there are any kind of keyboard shortcuts that you want to set up globally, such as setting your audio volume, increasing, decreasing that, changing your screen brightness, increasing, decreasing that, or just all sorts of these other shortcuts which are set through Fluxbox, you can make all those changes here at the moment. For instance, down here you see the workspace numbers. So this would correspond to how you can change Control-Alt F1, F2 to switch between the different virtual terminals that you have, or the terminals for the system. Well, if you hit just Control F1, F2, that'll actually let you switch between the different virtual workspaces in the desktop as well. So there you can just change and set keyboard shortcuts. Defaults, this would be what would be your default applications for different things. So here, if I open up the web category, you can see that there's just a few different things in here, and there's no default application set for HTTP, HTTPS, and FTP links yet. If you just hit set an application, you can go select one here really quick. I think we want, what is it, Chromium in this instance. Hit that, and it puts it in there, and you can just hit save, and there you go. Now Chromium is your default application for all of those links. It makes it very easy. You can create your own groups of extensions. You can add different extensions to groups. You can do it all right through there. Now if we go to the session options, it's very light at the moment. We're still adding more occasionally as time goes on, but first off, do you want to enable numlock? That's a pretty standard one that a lot of people want, but not everybody. Because
if you're on a laptop, it ain't
yeah,
as
such
good.
Exactly. Such as, for instance, if you're on a laptop, that you might not want that if it doesn't have a keypad. Startup routine, this is where it'd be, okay, when you log into Lumina, is there some kind of application that you also want to launch instantly? And you can do that as well. Just come in here and say, okay, I want to open this calculator application. So as soon as Lumina starts, it will also launch the calculator application for you on login. You can add, remove those, you can add files, you can search for specific binaries, all sorts of stuff in here for that. And then the window system. Okay, when new windows appear, where do you want to put it? Do you want to put them in a row? Do you want to align them in columns? Do you want to cascade them on top of each other so that you can only see the title bar for each one? Just place it underneath the mouse, wherever the mouse is, all sorts of stuff like that. Change your focus policy as well. So for instance, active mouse focus means it gives focus to the window that is underneath the mouse when you move the mouse. The strict mouse focus gives focus to the window underneath the mouse even if the mouse does not move. So if the window system itself changes or moves windows around, it's whatever is underneath the mouse at all times. You can change your appearance of your windows. For instance, this decoration around the window, this is all, again, set through Fluxbox, so there's tons of stuff that are available through Fluxbox. Just pick what you like and set it right through there. Change the number of virtual desktops you've got as well, and then just hit Save Changes, and there you go. So I believe, for instance, I like the square one. So I'll just hit Save there, and now I've got the square box theme. And that's how you configure the desktop. Quite simple, single utility. Everything is run through saving stuff to text files, so you don't have to worry about messing up or corrupting any individual little binaries on your system. It's very easy to edit and modify, and it takes effect instantly. All right, anything before we go on?
You're going to show us some examples, I guess, of files next?
Yeah,
okay.
We're going to move on, look at the file manager. This is the other unique thing to Lumina. It was written specifically for Lumina, and it is called the Insight File Manager. Now what we have here is, again, like a standard file manager. You can browse your directories. You can go into directories, you can go out of directories, you can go wherever you would want. But it gives you a number of other options as well. So for instance, if you're on ZFS and you have snapshots available, you can see this backup button available down here. If you click on that, you then have your time slider-like functionality. You can say, okay, I want older versions of files, and then you can look at the timestamps up there. Let me go to something really old.
Yeah, it's back
there
before
you
I
go.
added the files. So.
Exactly, so you can go back all the way. So okay, I'll just grab one here. And you can see, okay, there's the files at that point in time. You can select any of them or all of them. I'll just grab that one, and I'll hit Restore. Okay, it restored it. So now if I go back to my directory, you can see I've got another one there. Since I didn't select to overwrite it, it just appends a number to it instead. So now I have two versions. This is the one that was there, and that's the one I just restored from.
So getting those snapshots, for those who don't know, you'd probably use like the Life Preserver utility,
exactly,
which is built in, and you'd schedule like take a snap every hour or every day or every 5 minutes or whatever it is you want, and then that'll be
exactly
the rollback procedure you have.
Since I'm actually running PCBSD as I'm developing Lumina, you'll find that a lot of the utilities for Lumina take advantage of a lot of the PCBSD utilities and PCBSD stuff that we have running by default, such as the ZFS file system and the Life Preserver and stuff like that. Another good example here is a slideshow button. If you have images in a directory, you can just click that and you can browse through a slideshow of the images, whatever they would be. I actually created this one because I saw my wife constantly loading up some other application just to actually look at the pictures in a file manager, and I was like, well, that's easy. Why doesn't the file manager just do that? And so it does now.
Cool.
Similarly, create a new directory and stuff like that. Do you have multimedia files on here somewhere?
There's my old video I recorded, so if you go back to the home directory, there you go. You see PCBSD intro. That's an MP4.
All right. It doesn't look like we have the MP4 plugin on here right now.
Okay.
But that's okay. Usually there's another button that can appear down here, and it's a multimedia player.
Oh, okay.
So if you have the plugins available for like audio files or video files, you can actually have a whole other little basic audio player functionality as well. So you can click on that and play through all the multimedia files in a directory. Right from there. Again, basic functionality. It won't replace something like VLC, but you might not need to load up VLC if it's just a tiny little 3-second file you just wanted to see if you had the right one. So that's the general idea here. And then similar to web browsers, we have full bookmarking capability in Lumina File Manager as well. So for instance, if you go to a directory, you can hit the star button here to create a bookmark. Give it whatever name you want. If I could type right now, such as My Documents. And now if you go up here to the bookmarks, you can see it's shown up in the bookmarks. So you can browse between all sorts of different bookmarks that you set and just instantly cycle between them. And then you can also manage them from up here as well, removing them or renaming them.
Cool.
So quick links to places on your system. Now, just a second, go ahead.
Did you show it has tab support?
Oh yes, tabs, thank you. I do have full tab functionality. So if you go to File, you can go to New Tab, or you can press Control-T, and you can have tons of these things open at a time. And you can just cycle between them however you want.
Cool.
So it makes it very nice and very easy to go between and run all sorts of different things. Copy and paste files between different locations on the system, remove files, etc. If you right click, you can see all those other options: rename, remove, copy, paste, cut, delete, all sorts of stuff like that. So this would be File Manager. And the external devices menu is if you plug in a USB drive and mount it through the PCBSD mount tray here, it would show up here in this little list. So again, you have quick links to any other devices or other things that you have connected to your system at that moment. And then similarly to other file managers, you have the ability to show hidden files. You can change it to show, basic lists or go to icons. It's really up to you. Let me go to one that actually has something there. There's very basic icons there. But so you can switch between all that. I still prefer the detailed list. And then go back to the home. So that's the Lumina File Manager. Very easy, very quick, and very powerful with all sorts of other functionality built into it. And then now I'd like to show what happens when you try to open a file on Lumina that does not have a default application set up for that. So let me go up here to the handbook page. And for instance, let's try and open this PDF. So I'm going to double click on that really quick. And here we go. Okay, so there's a backend utility in Lumina called Lumina Open. So when you try to open a file with it, it says, oh, okay, I don't have a default registered for that application type yet. Here are the applications that are registered that can open that type of file. It looks like Atrial Document Viewer at the moment.
Yeah, whatever that is.
Whatever that might be.
Like Document Viewer's Ocular.
Yeah, but that's whatever applications would have registered the MIME types to say, hey, I do open PDF files. Say, for instance, the application you want isn't in there, though. You can always go to the application or the available options and say, okay, I want to go into the graphics because I know it's in there. Let's go find Ocular. I believe it's in here. There it is. There's Ocular. So I can select Ocular, and I can say, okay, I want to make Ocular my default now. And then hit OK, and it will open the file in Ocular. Or if it doesn't show up in the available list for some reason, you can always go over to Custom and actually say, okay, find the binary, clicking the button here, and it'll actually check, or you can type it in and it'll check whether that binary really exists and change this to a green check mark if that's a valid binary in file.
Mm-hmm.
So let's go ahead and go back there and just say, open that.
Yay.
And there you go. Oh, it opened two of them.
The demo demons.
Yeah, the demo demons. So there you go.
Yay, handbook.
So you can easily open files from within Lumina File Manager as well. And again, if you want to set your default applications, you can do all that through the desktop configuration tool very easily. And then one of the last utility that I've actually written for Lumina is called Lumina Screenshot.
I can't guarantee that'll work while we're recording the screen at the moment, so that might be a little iffy, but we'll give it a try.
Yeah, well, let me try it. I think it's under Utility. And Lumina Screenshot, there it is.
Hey, what do you know?
It actually worked.
Okay, good.
So yeah, so here is again just a simple utility, so you can take screenshots of your entire screen or select a window, delay it some time, and then hit the button and go. I'm not actually going to do it right now because we're recording, but yeah. So again, another simple little utility, and this is actually tied to the print screen button by default. But you can always go into the keyboard settings and change that if you would like. And that's basically a walkthrough of the Lumina desktop.
Cool.